The sun hadn't even burned off the frost when they dragged Eli Thatcher up that hill, and by the time it did, he was swinging. You could hear the creak of the old gallows long before you saw them. It's beyond the preacher's oak on the edge of town where the grass quit trying. That crooked frame stood like a splinter in the sky. Men stood with whiskey on their breath and hands in their pockets. Women watched from behind curtains, eyes wide but mouths shut. It was the kind of morning where everything was still, like the world was holding its breath. Eli Thatcher walked, with quiet steps, no struggle, no shouting, just dust rising at his heels. His wrists were tied with rawhide, the knots soaked to tighten in the cold. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at the hangman, only the sky. Judge Roll stood by a silver pocket watch twitching in his hand. His son, Silas, had been found dead behind the stables 2 nights ago, a bottle smashed at his side and a knife still in his gut. Folks said Eli had been seen arguing with him that same evening over land boundaries, said Silas, spit in Eli's face, and called him a half-blood mule handler. That was all it took, a name, a knife, and a need for someone to blame. Sheriff Kearns adjusted his hat, his jaw tight beneath his gray-streaked beard. He looked at Eli, then away, like maybe if he didn't meet the boy's eyes, it wouldn't feel so wrong. "Any last words, Thatcher?" the hangman asked, voice low but steady. Eli blinked up at the sun, still low on the horizon, turning the frost to steam on the gallows boards. His lips parted slowly. A man don't die if the truth's still walking. There was a moment, not silence exactly, but something deeper, a hush that pressed against the ears. That's when she moved through the crowd. No one really saw her arrive, just that suddenly there she was, a woman with a dark shawl pulled over her face, skirts dusted from travel, standing just behind the front line of onlookers. Her eyes never left Eli. The hangman pulled the lever, a trapdoor groaned, and then Eli was gone from sight, swinging like a leaf caught in a windless day. Some of the men bowed their heads. Others turned and left as if it were a chore. Done. Nothing more. The judge closed his watch with a snap, satisfied. The woman in the shawl didn't flinch. She turned slowly, her hands folded before her like she was holding on to something fragile. Then she walked away, boots silent against the earth. Sheriff Kearns lingered. For a long while he stared at the rope, at the empty air. His hand hovered over the badge on his chest, then fell limp at his side. He said nothing. The crows came. Later, 3 of them circling above the gallows in lazy spirals. One landed on the beam, cocking its head like it knew something the rest didn't. By midday, the town had returned to its rhythm. Hammers on nails, horseshoes clanging, children chasing dogs through alleyways. Folks didn't talk about it, not loud enough to hear. But in every sideways glance, every muttered prayer over soup, his name lingered like the shadow of a storm. The wind picked up near sundown, warm and sudden, cutting across the dry fields. It lifted dust and pine needles, carried the scent of far-off fire and river moss. And in that wind, something stirred. They say the dead rest easy if they're buried right. But Eli Thatcher wasn't buried. He was carried. And the wind don't always carry the dead. Sometimes it brings them back. The first breath came like drowning. Eli Thatcher jolted awake, lungs clawing for air that tasted like pitch and sap. Splinters tore his back as he thrashed against the pine boards above him. Dirt spilled in through the cracks, falling on his face, into his mouth. He kicked. The wood gave, with a crack like bone snapping. A shaft of gray light pierced the coffin. He dragged himself out into fog, cold, wet earth. Pine needles stuck to his skin. The rope mark around his neck pulsed like a second heartbeat. His hands were raw, fingers bleeding where nails had bent, trying to claw free in the dark. The forest stretched around him, silent and immense. Pines towered like sentinels. Mist hung low, curling at his knees. No birdsong, no footfalls. Just the slow drip of melting frost. He rose unsteadily, 1 foot in front of the other. Every limb screamed. Every breath burned. His shirt clung to him, damp with sweat, and something darker. The world tilted, his vision blurred, and then the past bled through. A fire, his mother's voice humming soft and low, the way she used to when he was too scared to sleep. When a lullaby in a language he only half remembered now, older than English, older than anything he could spell. She was brushing his hair with her fingers, whispering, "Wind carries, child. Wind don't forget." Then the lullaby stopped. Silence fell. And in the dream, the wolves began to howl. He stumbled forward through brush, past tree trunks wide as wagon wheels. Thorns tore his sleeves. Mud sucked at his boots. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a river whispered. He made it just past the water's edge before his knees gave. Collapsed on his side. Last thing he saw before the black took him again was a figure stepping through the trees. A woman. Shawl blowing behind her, moving with the silence of a shadow. When he opened his eyes, he was wrapped in pelts. Smoke curled above him, rising from a stone chimney that leaned slightly eastward. The cabin walls were made of hand-hewn logs, chinked with clay. Herbs dangled from the rafters, dry brittle things that smelled of bitter root and pine tar. The woman sat near the fire. Her shawl was off now. Her hair was long, braided down the back, streaked with gray but not aged. She was grinding something in a bowl, slow, methodical. Eli tried to sit. Pain flared in his ribs. She didn't look up, just said, "Don't." His voice came cracked. I cut you down," she said simply. He swallowed. At the rope. Had rubbed the skin raw along his neck. His fingers went there out of reflex, feeling the ridge of flesh. "Why?" She finally looked at him. Her eyes were dark, quiet, like coals that hadn't gone out yet. You weren't meant to die with. Lies in your mouth." She brought the bowl to him and lifted his head gently. Poured a bitter brew past his lips. It tasted like burned bark and copper. He coughed, choked on it, and she just waited. Her hand steady beneath his jaw. He drifted again. This time, no dreams. When he awoke, it was night. The fire had burned. Low. The room glowed faintly with embers and moonlight through the slats. Outside, he heard the snap of twigs, then silence. Then another sound, distant but unmistakable. Antlers clicking in the trees. A buck, maybe two, moving just beyond sight. Eli held his breath, listening. The woman was seated beside the hearth. Again, this time mending something in her lap, a pouch or a strip of leather. Her hands moved like someone used to waiting. "What's your name?" he rasped. She didn't answer right away. Then, Nia. Walla looked at the ceiling beams, the woven symbols etched into the clay between logs. Old marks, protective ones. Maybe his throat ached, but something deeper had cracked. "You believe I was innocent?" She didn't look at him. "I believe the judge's son bled on his own blade more than once, and that men like Rawls need a rope more than the truth." He let that sit. The silence was thick, but not empty. The fire popped. Somewhere far off, an owl cried. Eli closed his eyes again. Not from pain this time, from knowing he wasn't done, that his sleep took him. A voice whispered in the back of his mind, maybe his mother's, maybe his own. I woke with fire in my throat and death behind my eyes. But something in me hadn't been buried right. The first time Eli pulled the bowstring back, his shoulder gave out. The pain buckled him to one knee, teeth gritted hard enough to split, but he didn't drop the bow. Just rested there in the dust until the shake passed. Then he tried again. By the third morning, he could hit a burlap sack swinging from a tree branch. By the fifth, he was nailing rusted cans from 20 yards with Nia's old revolver. She never praised, never smiled. Just nodded once, barely enough to count, and moved on. They trained where the canyon opened like a cracked jaw, red. Rocks glowing under afternoon sun. Out there, the wind screamed like something wounded, and Eli learned to move with it. To feel the shift of silence before a rabbit bolted. To track hoof prints that disappeared into shale. Nia showed him how to make snares, how to keep his steps light, how to read the sky without asking. They rarely spoke during the day. At night, when the fire burned low and the stars carved silver scars across the sky, words came easier. Rawls took my uncle's land, she said one night, skin orange with fire glow, voice flat. Burned the crops. Said it was for rail. Cousin fought back, disappeared 2 days later. Eli didn't ask if she knew where the body was. I tried to fight, she added after a long pause. The way he does things, it ain't justice. It's rot dressed like law. You want revenge? No, she said, eyes flicking to the elk, just beyond the firelight, watching. I want truth to rot him from the inside. They sat in silence a while. Then Eli asked, Why me? You still breathing? She said. They traveled by night to the edge of town. Eli wore a wide hat, brim low. Nia walked ahead like a hired hand. They slipped in through the back of the undertaker's shop, where the air smelled of lye and cold stone. Old man Dalton had been pouring formaldehyde into dead cattle when they arrived. He looked up and froze. I saw your body. You saw what they wanted you to see, Eli said. Dalton shut the door and bolted it. He poured whiskey without asking. Silas Rawls was stabbed, aye, the old man whispered, voice shaking. But that blade had brass notches, same as what Ellis Grant carried. The judge's enforcer. Man, was 3 whiskeys deep that night, I told the sheriff. He told me to forget it. Eli stood still for a long time. Why didn't you speak up? Dalton looked down at his twisted hands. Truth's only good if someone listens. They left before dawn, cloaked in mist. Eli didn't say much on the way back, his jaw clenched tighter than before. In camp that night, he stared at the flames like they were showing him something only he could see. What's vengeance ever fix? He asked finally, voice low. Nia was scraping bark into a bowl. She didn't look up. I don't fix, she said, but sometimes it keeps the rot from spreading. Eli nodded once. Just once. The next day he broke open the old tack chest and found the tools he needed. Hammered a worn horseshoe onto the black stallion that had been pacing their pen since spring. The beast snorted under his weight, but didn't buck, like it knew where they were going. Eli ran a hand down its neck. They left me swinging at dawn, he said softly, almost to himself. I'll ride back before sundown. The town hadn't changed much. Dust still clung to the shutters. The same bent weather vane creaked above the general store. The gallows still stood, empty but waiting just beyond the preacher's oak. The sun hung low behind it. Now, casting long shadows across Main Street like black ropes, stretching toward the church. Eli Thatcher rode slow, cloaked and quiet, his black stallion's hooves thudding like war drums against the hardened dirt. He kept his face down, but the moment he passed the saloon, someone saw him. A gasp. Then another. By the time he reached the well in the center of town, a dozen folks had gathered. Some crossed themselves. Others backed away, whispering his name like it might summon something worse than death. He didn't stop, just rode on, dust curling behind him, cloak rippling in the gold light. Nia walked ahead on foot, eyes straight, unblinking. She held a bundle in her arms, wrapped in faded cloth. She passed through the crowd without a word, her presence parting them like a blade through water. At the courthouse, Judge Rawls stood. On the steps, silver hair combed slick, voice raised before a room packed with landowners and townsfolk. A banner behind him read, Re-elect Justice. He was preaching about order, about decency, about how he'd cleaned the rot from the county. Even when it meant Hung Een, a mongrel boy for the sake of peace, he added with a bitter smile. That's when Nia stepped through the courthouse doors. The room fell to a hush. Her footsteps echoed. She walked right to the front and laid the cloth on the judge's polished lectern. When she peeled it back, the room sucked in a breath. A blood-stained shirt torn and restitched at the ribs. Silas Rawls' initials still stitched at the collar. There were bruises, slashes, not just stab wounds, boot prints, knuckle marks. Judge Rawls blinked, voice gone hollow. What is this? Nia didn't answer. Eli stepped into the doorway. Behind her, light slashing across his face. The room froze. He looked older somehow, shadows under his eyes, a line at his jaw that hadn't been there before. But he stood straight. Your boy wasn't mine to kill, he said. But your lies? They're yours to bury. The judge reached for his pistol. Sheriff Kearns stepped forward, hand near his own holster, but paused. Eli didn't move. His hand fell away. Then he pulled his badge from his vest and let it fall. It landed with a soft clink on the wood floor. Rawls snarled, raised his gun, and fired. The shot went wide, hit the back wall. Screams erupted. Some ducked, others ran. And Eli, calm as a man pouring coffee, raised his revolver and fired once. The judge's hand exploded red, dropped the gun, and fell to his knees, howling. Eli didn't shoot again, just stood there, breathing steady. The townsfolk surged forward. Some shouted for a trial. Others wanted him strung up right there. But the lawmen, what few still wore their badges, stepped in and took Rawls by the arms. They didn't thank Eli. They didn't look at him. But they didn't raise their guns either. The crowd dissolved into argument and confusion. Eli turned, walked back out into the dying sun. He mounted the stallion and rode slow past the gallows, now painted deep black by the fading light. Nia met him on the ridge above town. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They stood there a while, watching as shadows crawled across the town like ink spilled on a ledger. "I didn't come back for revenge," Eli said, his voice quiet, steady. "I came back for the truth to stand on 2 feet just like a man should." And when the last light disappeared over the horizon, they turned away from the gallows and rode into the dark.